If you want to create courses that are meaningful for learners, that give them the opportunity to take what you're teaching them and use it in creative ways to solve complex issues, then learning theory is incredibly important. Now, learning theory is a study of how we learn. And the crazy part is studies have shown that students forget about 70% of what they've been taught within a 24-hour period. And the twist on that is that it's not about our brain. A big percentage of the reason why they lose that 70% is because of the way they're taught. So how they're taught. How does all this connect to learning theory? Well, when we rely on learning theory and actually know learning theory so we can apply it in creative ways to help the learners connect with that content, then that forgetting percentage goes way down. And this means that the way we build our courses is incredibly important because that's the how, especially in our online world. Learning theories are basically a set of principles that explain how we acquire and retain knowledge. So within these principles, we can look and figure out better ways to help students learn and better ways for us to teach as well. Whether it's online, face-to-face, wherever it is, we can rely on these learning theories to help people learn better, help us teach better. So we want to know these learning theories so we can become better and help others become better. And in turn, what this does is it creates a better learning experience. So these learning theories also connect with the learning experience that the student or learner is going through. So the significance of learning theories from my perspectives beyond the teaching and learning is that when we rely on our learning theories, we can then optimize the learning experience and ensure students not only grasp, but also apply and remember what they learn. This makes education more impactful, and that's what we want. We want high impact. There are three main learning theories. There is behaviorism, and that is really what AI is acting like right now. AI is very behaviorist in how it approaches its learning. And cognitivism, we'll get into cognitivism, which is the next step after behaviorism, and then constructivism, how we construct our knowledge. And we're also going to get into the technology and all the great things that are happening right now that are shaping how we learn. And we're going to look at this through the lens of what we call Connectivism. So behaviorism is our first learning theory. And when most people think about behaviorism, we have two giants of psychology, B.F. Skinner and Pavlov. When most people think about behaviorism, they think about Skinner or Pavlov. And the story of Pavlov's dog really explains behaviorism well. Dr. Pavlov had a group of dogs. When he rang the bell, when he would go in and physically ring a bell, the dogs would salivate. Well, they were trained to do that because what he did was he would ring the bell, then give the dog a treat. Ring the bell, give the dog a treat. So eventually, whenever he rang the bell, the dog would salivate, thinking that he was already going to get a treat. So that really kind of explains behaviorism. And in this case, it was positive reinforcement. What does that mean? That means adding a stimulus to get the desired behavior. So in this case, it's additive. Now, when we talk about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, positive is adding a stimulus and negative is removing a stimulus. Believe it or not, negative doesn't necessarily mean punishment. It means removing a stimulus in the hope of getting the desired behavior to happen. So we remove that stimulus in order to get that desired behavior from someone. Think about it as influencing by taking something away. So it doesn't necessarily mean, negative doesn't necessarily mean bad. And that happens to be something that's thought of quite often that is really kind of a falsehood. Negative reinforcement just means removing a stimulus in order to get the desired behavior. And behaviorism is used today still in training quite a bit because we see that the definition for learning in many training organizations is a change in behavior. Now we are often running into cognitivism, and cognitivism is a big shift from behaviorism. What is cognitivism? Well, cognitivism, it's easy for me to say, right? Cognitivism focuses on the internal mental processes of learning. So that internal focus is a big step away from behaviorism, which is an external focus. So in cognitivism, we're looking at how people perceive, acquire, and then remember content. Then we move on to encoding, and this is how we process the information. And it's really important in this piece to make connections with previously learned content and things like that, because the difference between an expert and a novice is the expert has more network connections with a piece of content in their mind and the white matter of their brain than the novice does. So if we preload ourselves to be able to encode and and prepare ourselves to connect this new information with previously learned content and experience, then this helps us create sticky learning that works. And we can do that. There's several ways we can help people do that. My favorite is before we even start, we predict what we're going to learn, and we can have actually a test. Believe it or not, you can give people quizzes, no stakes, 0 points quizzes on the content that's coming up, and ask them to use their previous knowledge. And then when they get their answer, when they give their answer, and then give them immediate feedback of the right answer of the new content, and that helps that content stick. So that's in the encoding phase. So we have the input or the perception. So we have input, we encode, and then if we encode correctly, that helps build our networks in the white matter of our brain, and that helps us become a better learner. That helps that learning stick. And then storage. So once we've perceive it, so once we get the input, once we encode it, now we have to store it. And what does storage mean? That means that we know where it is. So our mind knows where it is. So remember that storage or the recall of that information isn't just learning that fact in isolation, because that's not what we want. We want it connected with our network, because now that we're able to recall or store it correctly so we can recall it better, simpler, easier, we can then begin to use that content to solve complex issues with our creative and critical thinking. Now we're often running into constructivism. Constructivism focuses on the learner-centered approach. Constructivism is where we first hear that term, learner-centered, and it's about how the learner constructs their knowledge. So that means that previous experience is really important with that. And we've also learned that previous experience, remember in Cognitivism, and part of that encoding, that previous experience is important because we want to make more networks within that white matter of our brain. Well, Constructivism capitalizes on that quite a bit, and it advocates for that learner-centered approach where the focus is on the learner's experience and interpretation. In this approach, learners are encouraged to explore, ask questions, and engage in problem solving, making them active participants in the learning process. So that's the key ingredient. In constructivism, you actively are engaged in the learning process. So behaviorism, it was that external stimuli. Cognitivism, it was the mental processes. So we're getting closer to this active engagement. Now, constructivism, they are actively engaged in the learning process. So remember now also, though, that none of these work alone, because in constructivism, you're also going to be encoding information within your brain. So that mental process that encodes is just how you go about that encoding that is important. So asking questions is hugely important because curiosity is a critical element of any learning process. Sarah Cavanaugh calls emotion the spark of learning, and curiosity, believe it or not, is an emotion. So it's important to get people asking questions and actively engaged. So as you can tell, there's similarities between the top three there, behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. And within constructivism, previous experience plays a big role. That plays a big role also in constructivism as well. So constructivism really emphasizes the importance of prior knowledge and learning, and learners interpret new information and experiences through the lens of what they already know. So their experience through what they know and believe. So we see a lot of constructivism today. This means that learning is a personalized experience. Each learner constructs their knowledge from what they have previously learned. So previous knowledge, their unique background, and their unique experiences. So as they construct their knowledge, they see everything that they're gaining through that lens of their previous experience and their background. And that is so true. So do this for me for one moment. Think of a time when you saw something and you didn't quite understand what it was. So you may have been off in a distance, you didn't quite understand what it was. And what is the first thing you did? Well, the first thing you did was you started comparing it to stuff you already know. That could be a bird, that could be a wrench, whatever it kind of resembled. So you're going to automatically go through your previous experiences and what you already know until you get closer to it and you can confirm that it's something you already know or it's something new. So before we even come to the perception that this is something new, guess what? We're going to compare it to what we already know. So that's why constructivism is so powerful and that personalized learning is such a big deal. So now those are the big three. Those are the big three. We have behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and then the fourth is connectivism. So I guess I should say the big four. And neuroscience is now one of the fastest growing fields in learning theory. So neuroscience, how we learn, physically how we learn, is a hugely growing field. And along with the neuroscience, cognitive sciences, we also have AI, which is one of the newest tools that it came around in November 2022, where it was readily available to pretty much anyone with the ChatGPT launch. It's really changing the way that we create active learning. So now the AI doesn't really change behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, or connectivism, but what it does is it gives us many more opportunities to leverage how we learn. So even leverage neuroscience to allow us to create active learning for learners to have a more deeper engagement within the content. So it's really an amazing time to be an ID right now because of that.